It was the morning of June 10, 1912, when a quiet, sleepy town in Iowa woke to a discovery so gruesome it would haunt generations. The small town of Villisca, population just under 2,000, was known for its simple charm and close-knit community. But as dawn broke, the Moore family home became the epicenter of a mystery that would stretch beyond its rural borders. Josiah B. Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 visiting girls, the Stillinger sisters, had all gone to bed the night before, without a hint of what awaited them. When neighbors noticed the house was strangely silent the next morning, suspicions began to mount. By midday, someone ventured inside. What they found turned an ordinary farmhouse into a macabre crime scene. 8 people lay dead, their skulls crushed by an axe. Yet the story was just beginning. The killer had not only slaughtered his victims, he'd stayed a while. Mirrors were covered, a slab of bacon lay on the floor beside the murder weapon, and all the curtains were drawn. He had used an oil lamp with the chimney removed to navigate the house in near darkness. No valuables were stolen. The doors were locked from the inside. Whoever had done this had entered without force and left just as mysteriously. What kind of killer would commit such a heinous act, then linger as if in a trance? Who would spend time in a home filled with the dead, even preparing a plate of food? And perhaps the most chilling question, was he ever truly gone? The crime scene itself was a nightmare etched in blood. Josiah had suffered the worst. His face was mutilated beyond recognition, as though the killer had directed a personal rage at the man. Sarah, too, had been struck multiple times, her body twisted grotesquely under the covers. The children, all under 12, lay peacefully as if they'd never woken up, their small skulls fractured with cruel precision. The 2 Stillinger girls, just guests, were found in the back bedroom. One of them, Lena, had defensive wounds, a sign she may have briefly awoken and tried to fight off the attacker. Yet nothing was taken. No signs of robbery. The family Bible was open on a table. All the clocks in the house had stopped at midnight. It was as if time itself had frozen in that house, giving way to something cold and ancient and evil. The axe Josiah's own was left behind. It was wiped down but not clean. The handle was coated in bloody fingerprints, though they yielded no useful prints. Blood soaked through the mattresses, dripped through the floorboards. A bowl of bloody water suggested the killer had tried to clean up, but he hadn't left in a rush. As investigators began to comb through the house, rumors spread fast. The town buzzed with fear. Doors were suddenly locked at night, blinds were drawn tight, and suspicion fell like a shadow over everyone. People began to suspect each other. The preacher who had once stayed at the Moore house, a transient stranger who'd passed through days before, even someone from within the town. Theories blossomed like weeds, but answers never came. This was not just a murder, it was a message, a ritual, a wound ripped open in the heart of a town that would never truly heal. The investigation began with urgency, but descended into chaos almost immediately. The crime scene was compromised from the start. Neighbors, reporters, and even curious townsfolk wandered through the house before police could secure it. Important evidence was trampled or moved. The axe itself, a potential source of prints or DNA, was handled without gloves. In 1912, forensic science was still in its infancy, and what little could have been done, soon. Suspicion turned to Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had arrived in Villisca just days before the murders. He was peculiar, erratic, and had been seen attending the church event the Moores hosted the night before. Most chilling of all, he had left town early the next morning by train. Later, Kelly confessed to the murders but retracted his statement almost immediately. Many believed his confession had been coerced. He was eventually tried, and after 2 conflicting trials, released. Others pointed to Frank Jones, a prominent Villisca businessman and former employer of Josiah Moore. Their relationship had soured, and Moore had left Jones's company to start his own, allegedly taking major clients with him. Motive, perhaps, but no hard evidence. And no arrest. Or still, others whispered about serial killers. Around the same time as the Villisca murders, eerily similar axe killings were reported in other parts of the country: Colorado Springs, Rainier, Monmouth, and Ellsworth. All involved families murdered in their sleep, curtains drawn, lamps dimmed, an axe, often left behind, a trail of horror stretching across state lines. Was it possible Villisca's nightmare was part of something larger, something darker that moved like a phantom across the heartland in the years that followed? The house at 508 East 2nd Street sat abandoned, empty except for the memories it held. Locals spoke in hushed tones of strange happenings, unexplained footsteps, children's laughter where there were no children, cold spots in the night. Paranormal investigators flocked to the site, convinced something lingered there. Something left unfinished. Today, the house is a grim museum of tragedy. Tourists and ghost hunters sleep overnight in the very rooms where the Moore family died. Many leave with stories of nightmares, disembodied voices, or something far worse. Yet no matter how much attention the house receives, the questions remain unanswered. Who had the motive, the madness, and the means to carry out such horror? Why were the children spared no mercy? What compelled the killer to linger, to clean, to cover mirrors, to almost perform a ritual? More than a century has passed, but the Villisca axe murders still defy explanation. It was a crime of such methodical cruelty and intimate violence that it felt more than personal, it felt orchestrated. As if the killer wasn't just murdering a family, but sending a message. And if that message was meant for the town, or for us still reading about it today, one thing is clear: they were never caught. In the shadowy silence of Norway's icy fjords, a mystery has lingered for over half a century, a mystery cloaked in false identities, coded diaries, and a body burned almost beyond recognition. On the cold morning of November 29, 1970, a man and his two daughters were hiking through Isdalen, Death Valley, as locals call it, just outside the city of Bergen. It was there, nestled between the rocks and partially hidden under a formation of slate, that they stumbled upon something horrific: the scorched remains of a woman, lying in a grotesque pose, her front completely burned, her arms curled as if in a death reflex. The police were immediately called, and as they examined the scene, more questions than answers began to surface. The woman had no identification. Her clothing had all labels and tags meticulously removed. She wore expensive jewelry, but oddly, it was placed around her body, not on it. A fur hat, believed to have caught fire, lay nearby. The smell of burnt flesh still lingered in the cold mountain air. What was most disturbing, however, was the evidence that pointed to something staged. Round her were empty sleeping pill bottles, a half-empty bottle of liquor, and the peculiar positioning of her limbs almost ritualistic. No footprints led to or from the scene. The investigators were baffled. Suicide, murder, something else? An autopsy revealed 50 to 70 female brand sleeping pills in her system, along with soot in her lungs, indicating she was alive when she was set on fire. Her neck had bruising consistent with a blow or restraint. The contradictions were chilling. If she had overdosed, how was she still breathing? If she'd been killed, why the attempt to make it look like suicide? Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal the truth. When police began retracing her steps, the story took a stranger turn. A suitcase linked to her was found at Bergen railway station. Inside were wigs, eyeglasses with no prescription, and a notebook filled with what appeared to be coded messages. There were also cosmetics and clothing, all stripped of labels. Still, no ID, but there was a clue, a fingerprint that matched the woman found in Isdalen. Interpol was contacted. Sketches were released. Witnesses began to emerge. She had checked into several hotels across Norway under different aliases, always with false addresses and sometimes with different wigs. She spoke several languages: German, French, Flemish, and broken English. She often asked for rooms with balconies. She didn't like to be seen in every hotel. She seemed to be watching someone or being watched. Police began to suspect she was involved in espionage. The Cold War was in full swing. Norway was home to secret military tests, NATO operations, and naval installations. Bergen, in particular, was a hotspot. Could she have been a spy, a courier? An informant silenced before she could speak. And yet, if she was a spy, why was her death so messy, so dramatic, so exposed? Despite a nationwide manhunt, the woman's true identity remained a mystery. Authorities released composite sketches, public appeals, and circulated her fingerprints to international agencies. The response was silence. No one stepped forward. No friends, no family, no country claimed her. It was as if she had existed, solely in the shadows, slipping in and out of towns and lives without ever leaving a trace. Investigators tracked her movements through a breadcrumb trail of hotel registries. She had used at least 8 different aliases, all foreign-sounding names, all false. The handwriting varied, likely to avoid a pattern, in each hotel. She requested rooms with balconies or views, often paid in cash, and kept to herself. One hotel clerk remembered her as elegant, distant, and oddly intense. She'd spoken about antiques and art, with knowledge suggesting she was more than a drifter. Another guest claimed she was accompanied by 2 men, in one instance men who didn't speak but watched. The coded notes in her suitcase were eventually deciphered, not revealing state secrets, but something more mundane: dates, places, and times, a log of her own movements. But why such secrecy? Why the wigs, the alias after alias? And if she was being followed or following someone, who was the hunter and who the prey? Some theorized she had been a courier, possibly exchanging sensitive information between East and West during the height of the Cold War. Norway, though seemingly neutral, was strategically critical. The idea that she may have witnessed something or someone that she shouldn't have seemed plausible. More chilling was the thought that she had been burned, both literally and figuratively. As a warning to others, conspiracies blossomed over the decades. Some claimed she was a Mossad agent, others insisted she worked for the KGB, and a few believed she had been conducting corporate or industrial espionage. The evidence pointed everywhere and nowhere. In 2016, DNA testing provided a breakthrough of sorts. Her mitochondrial DNA revealed she likely had European root traces tied to southern Germany or northern France. It narrowed the possibilities, but only slightly. Her name, her life, her mission still unknown. Her remains were buried in an unmarked grave in Bergen. A metal plaque reads simply, "Unknown woman found in Isdalen." Even in death, her story is half whispered, like the cold wind that rushes through the gorge where she was found. Every few years, her case resurfaces on podcasts, in documentaries, across investigative journalism projects, and every time, new theories arise. Yet no one can answer the central question: who was the Isdal woman? Was she running from something or toward something? Did she choose her fate, or was it chosen for her? Perhaps the silence that follows her death is the loudest clue of all. The forests of Plumas County, California, are thick, quiet, and unsettlingly still at night. By day, the crisp mountain air and peaceful surroundings offer a sense of retreat from the chaos of the world. But on the morning of April 12, 1981, serenity shattered at Cabin 28 in the small resort community of Keddie. What unfolded inside that modest wooden structure remains one of the most brutal and mysterious mass murders in American history. Sue Sharp, a 36-year-old single mother, had moved to Keddie with her 5 children less than a year earlier. Escaping an abusive marriage, she sought peace and safety for her family. Cabin 28 seemed like a refuge: cheap rent, good neighbors, and plenty of space for her kids to roam. But behind that thin wooden door, an unimaginable horror waited. That morning, Sue's teenage daughter Sheila returned home from a sleepover at a neighbor's cabin. When she opened the front door, what she saw made her stumble back in terror. The living room was a slaughterhouse. Her mother, Sue, her 15-year-old brother John, and John's friend Dana Wingate, 17, were lying on the floor. All 3 had been bound with electrical cords and medical tape, then bludgeoned and stabbed repeatedly. Blood was splattered on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling. But the horror didn't end there. 3 younger children, Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin, were found alive in a back bedroom. Remarkably, they had slept through the carnage undisturbed. Sheila's sister Tina, however, was missing. Her absence opened a new layer to the nightmare. Was she kidnapped, killed elsewhere? Her body wouldn't be found for over 3 years. The crime scene was chaotic. It showed signs of both rage and ritual. Sue had been gagged and viciously stabbed in the chest. Her throat was slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. A hammer and a knife were both used in the killings, and the knife was later found bent from the force of the attack. The killers had clearly spent time inside the cabin. Duct tape was peeled from drawers, as if they were looking for something. The telephone was off the hook, the lights were out, and no neighbors had heard a thing. The cabin had no signs of forced entry. Investigators from the Plumas County Sheriff's Office arrived, but the case was mishandled from the beginning. Evidence was poorly preserved, and interviews were not conducted properly. As days turned to weeks, suspicions mounted, but no arrests were made. The silence in Keddie grew heavier. People started locking their doors, something they never used to do. The peaceful resort town now bore the weight of unspeakable violence. One theory quickly rose to the surface. Justin, the friend of Rick and Greg, had claimed to have seen some of the attack, possibly in a dream, possibly in reality. He described two men, one with a mustache and glasses, the other clean-shaven with long hair. A sketch artist created composites, but no one could identify the suspects. Meanwhile, rumors swirled. Sue was said to have been helping another woman escape an abusive relationship, possibly angering the wrong person. Others whispered about drug activity, love triangles, or feuds, but none of these leads resulted in a solid suspect. And all the while, Tina was still missing, her absence like a phantom that haunted the investigation. It wouldn't be until 1984 that her remains were discovered over 30 miles away. In a remote part of the woods, a human skull, jawbone, and fragments of clothing were found. Dental records confirmed the worst. Tina was dead. How she got there, and who took her, remains a chilling gap in the timeline. And still, no arrests, no answers, just blood, silence, and shadows cast long across the cabins of Keddie. Years passed, and yet the case remains stagnant, a cold echo in the files of Plumas County. But the town of Keddie never truly moved on. Every shadow that flickered across cabin 28 reminded locals of the unspeakable. In the absence of justice, the rumor mill did what it always does: it spun stories, accusations, and half-truths. But even rumor couldn't fill the gaping holes left in the official investigation. One of the most glaring issues was the suspicious lack of urgency shown by authorities at the time. The cabin wasn't secured properly. Crucial physical evidence like blood samples, fingerprints, and photographs was either misplaced or never collected at all. Witnesses came forward claiming that they had heard screams that night. Others said they saw strange vehicles or men loitering near the cabins. But none of these leads were followed with the rigor one might expect in a triple homicide. Then came a bombshell decades too late. In 2004, former cabin residents and investigators began revisiting the case. New interest was sparked when it was revealed that two suspects had long been on the radar: Marty Smart, the stepfather of Justin, and his friend Bo Bubede, a known ex-con with mafia ties. Both had stayed in a nearby cabin during the time of the murders. In fact, Marty had written a letter to his wife Marilyn shortly after the killings, stating, "I've paid the price for your love. I've killed 3 people today." The letter was never entered into evidence. More chillingly, Marty had confessed to a therapist that he was involved in the murders. That confession, too, was never passed on to the police, or if it was ignored. Years later, law enforcement admitted they had mishandled the investigation, and newer detectives even suggested that the case had been deliberately suppressed. In 2013, a hammer matching the description of the murder weapon was found in a nearby pond. Incredibly, it had never been searched before. Testing was inconclusive, but its discovery raised a haunting question: had the killers been closer than anyone realized all along? By 2018, DNA testing and modern forensics were applied to some of the evidence that had survived. New leads were uncovered, including blood found on a piece of tape and on one of the victim's jackets. Unfortunately, the degraded nature of the evidence and chain of custody issues prevented any concrete action. Today, the case remains officially unsolved, but unofficially, many point fingers. Marty Smart died in 2006. Bo Bubede died years earlier. If they were the killers, they took the truth with them to the grave. Others believe the murders were part of a wider cover-up, perhaps involving drug trafficking or local corruption. Some even speculate that the motive was personal, perhaps a vendetta, jealousy, or revenge. Cabin 28 was eventually torn down, as if to erase the memory, but the scar remains etched in the landscape of Keddie and in the minds of those who remember. The case is a stark reminder that even in quiet, wooded towns far from the eyes of the world, evil can slip through the cracks, and justice too often does the same. In the wintry hinterlands of Bavaria, deep in the German countryside, lay a small, isolated farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. It was the kind of place that sat quiet beneath snow-laden rooftops and creaking pine forests, miles from the nearest neighbor and even further from the safety of town life. It was here, in March of 1922, that one of the most haunting and perplexing mass murders in European history unfolded, leaving behind 6 corpses, a house full of secrets, and a mystery that endures more than a century later. The Gruber family, led by 63-year-old Andreas and his 72-year-old wife Chislia, lived a modest life on the farm. With them resided their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, her 2 children, 7-year-old Chislia and 2-year-old Joseph, and their maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had only just arrived the day before the killings. Life at the farm was hard but steady. Yet in the weeks leading up to the murders, strange happenings began to unsettle the household. Andreas had told neighbors about footsteps in the snow leading from the woods to the house, but none going back. Keys disappeared. A newspaper showed up that no one in the family subscribed to. At night, strange noises could be heard in the attic, but when searched, nothing was found. The family spoke little of these events, but the unease was palpable. Then came the silence. On April 4th, neighbors noticed that no one from the Gruber household had been seen in days. The children had not shown up at school. The mail was piling up. Concerned, several townspeople ventured to the farm. What they discovered inside would chill even the most hardened souls. In the barn, for bodies were stacked one atop another beneath hay. Andreas, Chislia the elder, Victoria, and young Chislia, all had been bludgeoned with a heavy instrument, most likely a mattock, a type of farming tool. Their skulls were crushed, some split open, others showing deep, decisive wounds. Inside the house, little Joseph and the maid Maria lay dead as well, killed. In their sleep, blood soaked the bedding, the walls, even the floorboards beneath them. The most disturbing detail was not just the brutality, it was the chilling calmness afterward. Whoever had committed the murders had stayed. Livestock were fed. Meals had been eaten. Smoke had risen from the chimney for days after the killings, suggesting the murderer lived in the house. Among the corpses, before vanishing without a trace, police arrived from Munich and launched an extensive investigation. But from the outset, confusion reigned. There was no sign of forced entry. The family dog had been tied up, and despite the remoteness of the location, there were no witnesses, no neighbors who had seen or heard anything unusual beyond the earlier eerie signs. Suspects emerged quickly and just as quickly fell away. Victoria's deceased husband had been rumored to be the real father of Joseph. Despite supposedly dying in World War I, could he have returned, hidden in rage, and exacted vengeance? Or was it Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former lover of Victoria, who had long argued over paternity and property rights? His behavior was suspicious. He was among the first to discover the bodies and reportedly tampered with the scene. Yet nothing definitive ever tied him to the crime. The community whispered endlessly, torn between sorrow and suspicion. Every creaking door, every gust of wind across the fields seemed to carry the echo of that unspeakable act, and the name Hinterkaifeck, once just a dot on a map, became a synonym for dread. As the investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders deepened, so did the sense that something profoundly disturbing lurked beneath the surface of the Gruber family's life. Detectives interviewed dozens of townsfolk, yet every answer seemed to open another corridor of uncertainty. The crime scene was trampled literally by curious onlookers and neighbors. Before it could be properly secured, valuable evidence may have been lost forever in those first chaotic hours. Autopsies revealed further gruesome details. The young Girl Chislia had likely been alive for several hours after the attack, clumps of her own hair torn from her scalp in terror. This heartbreaking detail suggested the killer may have murdered the family members one at a time, perhaps even drawing them into the barn one by one. The precision, patience, and brutality pointed toward premeditation. This was not a random act of violence, it was personal, methodical, and cold. Authorities cast a wide net. Travelers, escaped convicts, disgruntled farmhands, all were investigated. Victoria had been known to sing in the church choir and had a reputation that was both admired and quietly gossiped about. Some hinted that she was involved in an incestuous relationship with her father, Andreas, a rumor bolstered by records of a prior conviction. Was the killer someone who knew the family's secrets? All too well, theories swirled. One popular notion was that a vagrant had been hiding in the attic for days, living in the shadows and waiting for the right moment to strike. Another suggested a revenge killing tied to money, inheritance, or shame. One theory even posited that the killer was a local farmer who had visited the homestead frequently, under the guise of buying eggs or milk, and had simply waited until the new maid arrived to make his move. Yet for all the rumors and theories, the trail always led to a dead end. In 1923, over a year after the murders, the farmstead was demolished. But before the wrecking crews moved in, a macabre discovery was made. Deep in the barn's foundations, a hidden compartment was found, containing an old mattock believed to be the murder weapon, though rusted and degraded. It matched the injuries described in the autopsy reports. How had investigators missed it the first time, or had someone returned and hidden it later? The case faded from headlines, but never from memory. In 2007, students at a German police academy took up the Hinterkaifeck murders as a cold case study. They reviewed original files, re-examined forensic evidence, and compared psychological profiles of the main suspects. Their conclusion? They believed Lorenz Schlittenbauer had the means, motive, and opportunity, but even their findings couldn't satisfy the law. No charges were ever filed. Over a century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Europe's most confounding unsolved crimes. The rebuilt land now houses nothing but a monument and windswept silence. But those who visit say that sometimes when dusk settles and the last bird call fades, you can still feel the weight of unseen eyes, that eerie sense of something watching from the trees, and the name Hinterkaifeck lingers, a ghost story with real bones beneath it. It began in the quiet, unassuming neighborhood of Atlas in Stockholm, Sweden, an area known more for its orderly charm than unspeakable horrors. But in May 1932, a gruesome scene shattered the illusion of Scandinavian serenity. Inside a small, dimly lit apartment, the mutilated body of a woman was discovered. Her name was Lily Lindström, a 31-year-old woman known to work as a sex worker. The discovery shocked not only her neighbors, but the entire nation, launching what would come to be known as the case of the Atlas vampire. When police arrived at Lily's apartment, they found her lying face down on her bed. She had been dead for several days. The room was cold and eerily silent, but the nature of the crime made the air feel thick, oppressive. Her skull had been crushed by repeated blunt force trauma, but it was what had been done after her death that truly disturbed investigators. A blood-stained gravy ladle was found nearby, apparently used to drain and consume her blood. Her body was partially undressed, and there were signs that she had engaged in sexual activity. Shortly before her death, a condom was found at the scene, used and still containing semen. Tests confirmed it had been used by someone other than Lily. But in 1932, forensic science could go no further. The autopsy revealed that most of her blood had been drained. It wasn't just murder, it was ritualistic, almost vampiric. The police interviewed numerous clients and acquaintances from Lily's address book. Each interview led nowhere. There were no witnesses, no obvious signs of forced entry, and no weapon that could be definitively tied to the crime. Though many were questioned, including known criminals, no one was ever charged. The press seized the case with vampiric fascination of their own, branding the killer the Atlas vampire. Sweden, a nation unused to serial-style violence, was horrified. Rumors of cults and occult practices circulated wildly. The case bore eerie resemblances to folklore tales of vampires who prey on the lonely, the outcast, and the forgotten. What unsettled people most wasn't just the bloodletting, it was the silence that followed. No similar crimes occurred before or after. No killer taunted the police. No further evidence surfaced. The murder of Lily Lindstrom seemed to exist in a vacuum, an isolated incident, full of ritualistic overtones that was never repeated. It was as though the killer had emerged from the shadows to claim one life and then vanished, leaving only questions and dread. To this day, investigators and criminologists revisit the case, attempting to apply modern psychological profiling and forensic theory. Some believe the killer was a disturbed client with delusions of vampirism, while others think it may have been an organized cult killing, staged for effect and mystique. But in the absence of new evidence, the Atlas vampire remains just that, a phantom in the fog, a killer who fed on blood and mystery in equal measure. Despite the passage of time, the image of the crime scene remained burned into the memory of every investigator who set foot inside Lily Lindstrom's apartment. The atmosphere had been so unsettling that some detectives refused to speak of it for years. Afterward, there was something beyond the violence, something ritualistic and deeply unsettling, as though the act itself had been part of a dark performance. As news of the murder spread, Stockholm was gripped by fear and speculation. The phrase Atlas vampire dominated headlines, and whispers of occultism, necrophilia, and even demonic possession circulated in cafes and train stations. It wasn't just the brutality of the act, it was the symbolism. Who drinks blood from a ladle? Who takes the time to drain a victim with such eerie precision? The killer had not fled in a panic. They had lingered. The only physical clues were meager. The semen found in the condom was carefully preserved, though in 1930 no method existed to match it to an individual. Modern DNA testing wouldn't become possible for another 50 years. Still, police kept the evidence in hopes that one day science would catch up with evil. Theories came and went. Some suspected a client who had grown obsessed with Lily, perhaps one who believed himself a literal vampire or was enacting a psychosexual fantasy. Others believed the murder was part of a series of crimes that were either covered up or misclassified, hinting at a potential serial killer who had struck before or would again. But as weeks passed and no further leads emerged, the case grew colder. Those closest to Lily described her as kind but cautious. She had a loyal client base and rarely took risks. That only deepened the mystery. She must have trusted the person who killed her, or at least known them well enough to let them into her home. That trust ultimately cost her everything. In later years, some true crime researchers revisited the case with fresh eyes. They noted peculiar inconsistencies in the crime scene reports. For instance, while the police documented a ladle used for drinking blood, no clear explanation existed for how or where the killer had disposed of the majority of it. There were no visible drains, no large pools of blood, only the eerie suggestion that it had been consumed. How much had been taken, and more disturbingly, why? Some contemporary criminologists suggest the possibility of a psychological delusion, Renfield's syndrome, named after the Dracula character obsessed with consuming life force through blood. Those afflicted often believe they must drink blood to survive or gain strength. Others suggest that the killer was enacting a kind of purification rite, symbolic or occult in nature, which might explain the clinical, almost ritualistic nature of the killing. Whatever the motive, the Atlas vampire left no trail, no fingerprints, no additional murders, just a void. Lily Lindstrom's name became inseparable from the legend. A woman remembered more for the gruesome manner of her death than the quiet dignity of her life. Today, the building where she lived still stands. Its halls are silent, the apartment long since remodeled, but some tenants have reported strange occurrences: a flickering light in the hallway, unexplained cold drafts, and in rare instances, the faint smell of iron blood. Whether these are tricks of imagination or remnants of an unspeakable act, no one can say. What remains certain is that in the heart of orderly, rational Sweden, a killer once stepped outside the bounds of human behavior and vanished. The Atlas vampire was never caught, never named, just a shadow in the dark, drawn to blood, who came and left without a trace.